Welcome back to another Hockey Thoughts with Scott. We're continuing our series about NHL expansion. The first video we talked about just the cities where the NHL could potentially expand. Then in the latest video that we put out, it is expanding to 36 teams. In this video, we're going to get into expanding to 40 teams, what the divisions would look like, how the structure for the playoffs would look like, and so on. So let's get straight into this. Let's not waste any time here. If you have not watched the first two videos, I am going to put you should see a link coming up just above where my head is right now on the cities video, as well as the expansion of 32 teams. Let's start off with the cities that are still in contention. I'm going to go through them quick. The Maritimes, Halifax, Moncton, New Brunswick, Hartford, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Charlotte, Birmingham, Alabama, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Austin, San Antonio, Texas, Oklahoma City, Omaha, Nebraska, Saskatchewan, Salt Lake City in Utah, Boise, Idaho, and finally Portland, Oregon. So with that said, based on these cities that are left over, we're going to choose 4 of them to expand our league from 36 to 40. So the first city that I'm going to expand the NHL to is going to be Austin, Texas. Austin is a growing city, has nearly 1 million people in it, a lot of tech industries, a lot of people that live in other parts of the country are relocating to Austin. So this is a city that I think could easily handle an NHL team. I also see this as a city very similar to Las Vegas, where the first pro team that comes in is going to get a ton of support. So that's why I'm choosing Austin in this particular instance. Second city is going to be Salt Lake. They have a building in Salt Lake already. It is primarily a winter city in the sense of being able to go skiing, and they had the Winter Olympics there several years back. The population, I believe, is there as well as the corporate support that they would need. Same thing for Portland, Oregon. Just as a reminder, Portland was a city that was thought of to be able to take on either the Sabres or Penguins back in the early 2000s when both of those franchises were struggling financially. The last city is going to be maybe a little bit of a surprise to some of you, but I'm going to place the team in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee was a contender back in the early 90s for NHL expansion. Its proximity to Chicago, Minnesota, I think it would be a natural hockey fit, even though most people don't think of Wisconsin in that way. So I'm going to put the 40th franchise in Milwaukee for the purposes of this discussion. Now, when we talk about realignment and the divisions, there's a couple different ways I think you can go with this. You can go with 4 10-team divisions or 8 5-team divisions. We're going to take a look at both. But there are some considerations that we need to consider here. The first consideration does have to be the cluster between Buffalo, Toronto, and the second team in the Toronto area, whether it's Hamilton, whether it's named Toronto again, who knows. The other consideration is for the Western Conference, or potentially the teams that would be in a Western Conference, east of the Mississippi, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Nashville, do they go to the Eastern Conference or do they stay in the West? 3 of the teams that we've added in are in the Western Conference. They are west of the Mississippi. So 2 of the teams, so Chicago and Nashville, could they both come to the East? Does it make sense for Milwaukee to go to the East? Again, there's a lot of things to consider and to think about from that standpoint. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to move Milwaukee and Chicago to the East, and we're going to leave Nashville in the Western Conference. Now, our first 10-team division, we're going to start out West, Pacific Division. This is the easiest one to break up. if we need to. Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, San Jose, LA, Anaheim, Vegas, Arizona. Easy. That's the easiest one in my opinion. Once you identify which team it's in the Central is going to stay in the West, the rest of that division is fairly easy to break apart. So it really came down to the decision between Milwaukee, Chicago, and Nashville staying in the Central. Since the decision was made to keep Nashville in the Central, we're going to, again, the rest of the teams that are west of the Mississippi are going to be in that Central Division. So Winnipeg, Minnesota, St. Louis, Kansas City, the Texas teams, Colorado, Salt Lake, with Nashville. Now, in the East, if you want to call it the Atlantic Division, if you want to call it the Southeast, it doesn't really much matter what you call it. You have the New York-based teams, Philly, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Washington, Carolina, and then the two Florida teams, Tampa and the Panthers. Giving you a Northern Division in the Eastern Conference made up of Boston, Quebec, Montreal, Ottawa, the two Toronto teams, Buffalo, Detroit, Chicago, and Milwaukee. The cool thing about this division is that 5 of the 6 original 6 teams would now be in the same division. Only the Rangers would be out of that division. So that is something from a nostalgic standpoint would be very cool. Let's take a look at how the regular season would break down. And we're looking again at an 82-game schedule, 4 to 5 games for your divisional rivals. And I want you to notice that it turns out to be 42 games, which is more than half the season. It's one more game than half the season that's focused on divisional rivalries. This is going to have an impact on what the playoffs are going to potentially be. 2 games against the rest of the conference, the other division, and then you play 1 game against the opposite conference. So every other year, you would see the opposite conference in your building. Now, that gives you your 82 games. Now, when we talk about the playoffs, when you go to 40 teams, I don't think 16 teams is going to be kept as the standard for playoffs. I think it's either going to be 20 or 24 teams. So we're going to take a look at 20 or 24. I don't think 32 is realistic. You're talking about adding an extra round, and only 8 teams would miss. I think it's too many teams in the playoffs at 32. On a 20-team playoff format, it's going to be very similar to what you have right now in the NHL, where the top 3 teams in the division make the playoffs. The division winners would play the wild card winners. Now, when I say wild card winners, that means we're going to have 4 wild card teams. Now, the second and third place team in the division will play each other in the first round. The wild card teams would be the 4 best non-top 3 finishers, and they could be from the same division. So if you have a division that's really good, you could have a team that finishes 7th in one division making the playoff over a team that's 4th in a weaker division. Those 4 teams would play a best of 3 series, and that would start 2 to 3 days after the season completes. So this is something that the league would have to think about and how they're going to schedule the end of the season to get those wild card series in. Now, that wild card series would really take place over a 4-day period. The lower seed would host game 1. You'd have a travel day, and then the next 2 nights would be at the higher seeds building. So games 2 and 3, if the game 3 would be needed, would be played at the higher seed. So that's where the home ice really comes into play in a very short series such as this. The winner, obviously the winners of those wild cards would then play the division winners. The 2 versus 3 would play each other. Second round would stay within the division. The winners within the division would play each other, and then go on to the conference finals and the Stanley Cup final. Again, no changes to that structure. Now, let's talk about if this was a 24-team playoff. the top 2 teams make the playoffs in each division. You also then would have 8 wildcard teams. Again, it could be the top non-top 2 finishers. It's just the best 8. All 8 teams could be from the same division. It's not likely, but it's a possibility. They would again play a best of 3 series. Now, the reason why I'm proposing best of 3 as opposed to best of 5 has to do with the timing aspect. If you did a best of 5 series, you'd have a back-to-back for game 1 and 2, day off, back-to-back 3 and 4, day off, game 5, day off, and then the next series would begin. So for the team that's waiting for trying to find out who they're going to be playing, one of the top 2 teams in the division, they may be off 10, 11 days, and it may be too much time. Format would still be the same on the best of 3. Lower seed gets the first game. Higher seed gets games 2 and 3 played on back-to-back nights. You're done in that series is done in 4 nights. And then you can move on to the main round, to the main bracket, and go on from there. Wildcard 1, 8. Wildcard 2, 7. Wildcard 3, 6. 4, 5. And then the second round, or the true first round, would be your divisional winner versus the lower of the wild cards, and then the second place team would get a higher wild card. So again, it goes back to the order of finish within the season itself, determines what that first round matchup is going to be. Second round is going to stay within the division itself, and then the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals would be the same. So on a 20 or 24, you are looking at that wild card round, 3 games. It's good for the league. It's good for the team that make it because it's a gate-driven league. But it's also good, potentially good for the players, because it could help offset some of the escrow that's in the CBA. So that's something to consider. Now, let's take a look at if the league decided to go with 8 5-team divisions. We're going to start out west again. You have your Pacific Northwest and your Pacific South teams. Again, just take the Pacific teams, put a line in between them. You have your Northern, you have your Southern. Boom, you're done. No big deal. Now, when it comes to the Central Division, again, there's some questions here. Does it make sense to keep Nashville in the West? Or keep Chicago or Milwaukee in the West? Move Nashville to the East? Again, we're going to stay with Nashville in the West. And our Southwest Division would be the 3 Texas teams, along with Salt Lake City and Colorado making up one division. And then the North Central Division would be Nashville, St. Louis, Kansas City, Minnesota, and Winnipeg. So that's your Western Conference. Now the Eastern Conference gets a little harder to dissect a bit. When you talk about that Atlantic Division, that's actually fairly straightforward to split. Take the New York teams, Philly, Washington, call it the Metropolitan Division. Take Columbus, Pittsburgh, Carolina, and the Florida teams. There's your Southeast Division. Or call it whatever. Call it something else. To me, it doesn't matter what you call it. Now the question becomes, what do you do with the Toronto teams and Buffalo? Do you keep them together? Do you split them up? I think there's no way that you can keep them together. It's just, I mean, no matter the permutations that you work with, if you're looking at it from a geographical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to break up Buffalo and then the 2 Toronto teams. And the way I would break them up is I would have Buffalo in a division with Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec, and Boston. giving you a Great Lakes division of Toronto, Hamilton, Detroit, Chicago, and Milwaukee. Now, you can make the argument, okay, maybe Buffalo goes to the western side, Toronto stays with Montreal, again, to keep that rivalry together. Again, there's a couple different ways I think you could split this up. And this is where another argument in keeping, having Nashville come to the east and keeping Milwaukee or Chicago in the west, because then you can move Nashville to the southeast. You can move Columbus or Pittsburgh into one of those divisions and work with it from there. So there's a few different ways that you can go about setting this up. Now let's take a look at the regular season based upon a 8-division league. 6 games each within the divisions. That's going to give you 24 games with your 4 divisional rivals. 2 games against the rest of the conference, giving you another 30 games. You play everybody in the opposite conference once, and then you have an extra game against a opposite conference division. So the Metropolitan Division could potentially play the Northwest Division instead of just the regular one time a year. They would play them home and home, and then rotate that through every 4 seasons. So every 4 seasons, you play a team in the opposite conference 5 times over those 4 years, unless you meet in the final. Now if we're going to stay with an 82 game standard, there's 3 extra games that we have to account for. And in a 4 division per conference breakout, you can get an extra game versus your conference opponents, playing 1 per division, and it could be based upon the previous season finish, where all the division winners would play each other a 3rd time. All the second place teams would play all the second place teams a 3rd time, and so on and so forth. I think that's where you can get a little bit, I don't want to creative with the schedule, but that's how you could get to an 82 game schedule. Now you could take those 3 games, roll them up into your division rival games, where you're playing 6 and 7 games per within the division. Again, I threw this out as a little bit of a different bend and a different idea. Let's talk about the playoffs. Again, we're looking at a 20 and a 24 team setup. The difference here being that there is 4 divisions. You have your 4 division winners, and then the next best teams, the next 6, regardless of their division. All your division winners will get a top seed, regardless of their finish. Seeds 7 through 10 would be the wild cards. Again, they would play a best of 3, as we discussed in the 20 team segments in this video, and in the 36 team league as well. So it's a best of 3 series, go over 4 days. Same structure, lower team hosts game 1, higher team gets games 2 and 3. The winners of those series would become seeds 7 and 8. So seeds 5 and 6 would be set. They would play 5 and 6 would play 3 and 4. So you would end up getting a 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5 setup in the first round. You reseed after the first round for the second round, and then you have your final conference finals and Stanley Cup finals. No changes there. If you go to 24 teams, again, no changes to the division winners. It's just you're now looking at the next best 8 teams. So your division winners are in the playoffs. All of your non-division winners are going to have to play in a wild card. So seeds 5 through 12 would be wild cards. Same structure, best of 3 over 4 nights. Lower seed hosts game 1. Higher seed gets games 2 and 3. So it'd be 5. It really would be 5-12, 6-11, 7-10, 8-9, and then you'd have some reseeding those those seeds would become 5 through 8, 1, 8, 2, 7, 3, 6, 4, 5, reseed going into the second round, and then you have your conference and Stanley Cup final. No changes there. So the biggest point that I want to draw from all three of these videos is that there is room, there is ways for the NHL to have growth. You can expand the playoffs if you choose to go that direction with it. If you find that at this point going to 36 or 34 or 40 teams is just not sustainable, you may not be wrong. Because one of the things that you have to keep in mind with all this is the talent pool. Now, when the league went from 21 to 30 teams over a 9-10 year period, there was a lot of I don't want to say that the quality of player was any less, because they're better than me on the ice. I mean, I'm talking about it, they're playing it. But when you start building, you look at Nashville, you look at Arizona, even Arizona produced a first overall pick in Austin Matthews. Does that happen if the Coyotes don't go to the desert? So you may be looking at, again, just like we saw in the early part of the 90s going into 2000s, it may take 10, 15 years to develop new talent, but the talent's going to be there, and the league is going to be robust because of it. So these are my thoughts about NHL expanding the cities, going to 36, and in this video, 40 teams. If you've liked what we've talked about here, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button to like it. If you want to get more, if you like my content, I please ask you to subscribe, hit the bell, so whenever new videos do come out, you'll get that as well. I thank you for watching this series of videos. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.